Good evening, and welcome to an amazing evening full of discussion and debate. Tonight, we will focus on something we all love: food. Together with LU Innovation, we invite you to this semester's first Trendspotting. Food has always been a pivotal aspect of our social lives. It's not just a sort of nutrition, it's a part of our culture, and it's increasingly important for us in everyday society. Together with our panel and you, our audience, we will deep dive into conversations about what we'll be eating in the future. Questions such as what is the protein of the future, the social aspect of eating, and how habits have developed overall are the focus of tonight's event. My name is Ylva. I will be the moderator tonight, and I'm the executive director of VentureLab. And together with VentureLab and LU Innovation, I want to welcome you all to the first Trendspotting of 2021. With us today, we have an amazing panel. We have Claudia Manzo. She's the founder of Entomovis and has been part of VentureLab for some time now. She's one of us. Entomovis, her business, aims to bring insects to the dinner table, one bug at a time. She provides the Western consumers with knowledge needed to approach insects as food and promoting the benefits and show how they can be included in everyday recipes. Claudia is not only an expert within her field, but she is also a true inspiration. Hanses van Lunteren is a business designer that's also with us, and he works with our partner incubator Krinova. He also acts as their leading expert in their food forum, Krinova Mat. He's not only a food enthusiast, he also he always looks out for trends and happenings in regards to food. He also liked to focus on how the pandemic have changed the way we look at food and how it has changed the culture and how we look at it, and how it really has started a need to be creative in the food business. We also have with us here in the studio Arash Sabet. Arash, he is a food tech innovator and entrepreneur. He's been working in the food industry for some time now. Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. He's been the COO of Holy Greens, the general manager of Sticks and Sushi in Copenhagen, and has now started the company Simply NoWaste. Arash is all about people and organizations, and he will bring his expertise of food tech startups to this panel. Then we have Malin Eriksson. She has a passion of exploring possibilities and answer the million-dollar question: how do we develop tasty food products that meet the consumer's needs and wants in a sustainable and responsible way so that both people and the planet can thrive for many years to come? Through her professional expertise as both a part of ICA Group and now Lantmännen Cyrilia, Malin is a true expert within the field of researching sustainable products for the future of foods. And then finally, the last person in our panel and our keynote speaker tonight, we have Håkan Jönsson, who is a researcher, chef, and professor at Lund University. And I would like to quote Håkan himself here: "Most of my life has been revolved around food. Above all, he's interested in why we eat. The importance of food and meals in relationships to people and for personal identity fascinates him. Food has always a unique ability to create both community and difference, liberation and oppression, enjoyment and anxiety. Håkan believes that the meal is one of the cornerstones of our culture, and it deserves more attention as a cultural expression than it has received in Sweden as for today." So with that said, I have Håkan with me right now, and take it away, Håkan.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that wonderful introduction. So I will start and share a presentation so you don't have to see my boring home office. I feel a little bit jealous about Amanda and Arash with their fancy environment. So How do we eat into the futures? Well, let me start the discussion at least with a few remarks here. First of all, and I hope that you see me switching slides, otherwise just shout on me. This is the image of eating in the future, right? The meal in a pill. This is from a science fiction poster of the 1950s, and it has an even longer history. For 100 or perhaps 150 years, we have always been thinking that in the future, man will live on a single pill. And we could do it. I mean, the technology is there and have been for decades. And there are, of course, single opportunities or single occasions, I would say, where we actually would like to do it, and some people even does it. But that's not happening on a regular daily basis, and I'm pretty sure that it will never happen, at least not if we can avoid it, since food is as such immensely a social event, as here in the final supper.
I'm
It's
so
been
sorry, Håkan. We can see that you have switched slides, so I just want to quickly interrupt with that.
okay. Then, as the next question, do you see it now in sort of open view with all the slides? Yes, or
Yes.
okay. So, any ideas should how one if I should? Obviously, it wasn't good enough if I pointed on the normal reader's view.
That looks
Do you
better.
see?
Yeah, that now it's good.
Did you see me switch slide now?
Yes, I did. Perfect.
Oh, perfect. So okay, so of course now you understood what I was talking about, the meal in a pill and the science fiction comment. Uh, so moving on. Don't have to repeat it, but this is the vision of the future and has been for decades. But still, we will not end there because food is so fundamentally social. And I'm sure that we will not lose that in the future. We will, however, have to think about how we organize sociality in the future, but I'll get back to that. Now, we talk a lot about the protein shift, right? That we need to change the way that we eat protein. And of course, to some extent, that's absolutely right. But I would like to point out that this is not the first protein shift that we are about to undertake in history. There have been several of them in history, and perhaps the main big difference came in the transitions from the Neolithic to the Paleolithic period, from the Stone Age to the age of where farming became the dominant production way. Then we changed from eating much more, eating a lot of wild animals, berries, roots, etc., into the fundamentally starch and carbohydrate rich food of the agricultural era. And then we have had several protein shifts over in history, and we will probably have many more. So it's not something fundamentally new. And what I'd like to stress is that we can and should learn quite a lot from the history. For instance, there was the 1950s version of it when the Swedish Research Institute SEEK was founded with a charismatic Georg Borgström. It was at about the same time as the fear against an upcoming food scarcity, the population explosion, the need to find new food for a growing population, and the ideas was that it could come from different parts, but especially from the oceans. The 1950s, it was a time of meat analogs, of burgers made from algae, from mushrooms, and so forth. No, I wasn't talking about the 2020s. I was talking about the 1950s. So we have basically a very, very similar discussion today, both about the growing awareness of food scarcity, growing population, impacts on the environment, but also, and perhaps even more interesting, quite a lot of similar solutions on how to deal with it. So we can learn a lot from history. We do not have to and should not reinvent the wheel, because there were, of course, some flaws made in the 1950s. So why the success of the chlorella cuisine, for instance, didn't make it all the way to the market, at least not to the extent that Joe Borstam and his fellows thought about. There are also other learnings from history. There is a saying in Swedish, which translated to English will be like this: meadow is field's mother, äng är åkers moder. And I think there's so much wisdom in this. The story behind it is that in an agricultural society where you had a village as the social unit, you also had different parts of land. You had an integration between the soil, the people, and the animals. And you all knew that if you didn't take care of the meadow, if you didn't take care of the animals, the cows and the goats, and sometimes the lamb that was grazing on the meadow, you wouldn't get any harvest from the fields, or at least not good harvest, because without the animal and the animal feed, no manure, hence less cereals. So there was a sort of an real an everyday practice of knowing that there is a reasonable proportion between different types of land, that you need them all in order to feed everyone in the community. And also knowing that there is an integrated perspective between different parts of the resources that we have. And I think that quite a lot of this wisdom that we need to think about not only harvest food products or the food on the plane, but we need to go back in the stream. We need to go back to the origin. We need to take care of not only the field, but also of the meadow, of everything that feeds resources into eating. There was also sort of a clear connection between people and animals. And everyone knew that there was a limit for how many animals you could feed. But at the same time, you needed the animals, because otherwise, as I said, no manure and perhaps not any clothing or shoes and etc. So there was a proportion between vegetable and animal food that was simply just there. It was more or less self-organizing. And there is a myth today that food or traditional food, we can't go back and eat traditional food because it was so high in meat. Bullshit. We consumed a very, very small proportion of meat if compared to today, if we go back 100 years in history. There was a proportion based on the landscape, and this was learned down from generation. So there's absolutely no juxtaposition between traditions and future when it comes to sustainable eating. Rather the contrary, we can actually learn from history on how to achieve sustainable eating. What we can also learn, I think, is from the storage economy. Look here, look at all the jars, that we need to store things. We need to take care of the food when it arrives and make sure that it lasts over the years and for everyone, by not indulging too much, neither of eating too little so that we will starve. The idea of lagom, the Swedish word, something that is enough for everyone. You take your own proportions so that it should be able to go all around the table, right? Look at these pictures. They are all pictures of people sharing something, sharing food. And you can talk about this in different ways. You can talk about it as companionship. A companion, that is originally someone you share bread with. You can also talk it as you do mostly in Anglo-Saxon countries about commensality, and that is mensa. It comes from the mensa, the Latin word for table. So that is where you change the table, the community of the dinner table. And then you have communities, and we always have had food communities. We still have today, but perhaps it's just that the communities look a little bit different, such as the social media Facebook for vegans community on the image. What we should avoid is, however, to go on and put ourselves in a status of gastronomie, as Claude Fischler, the French sociologist and theorist, said, a state where food loses its meaning, where we have so much pressure and thinking about, so that we forget how the importance it is to share food with others. That is not to say that food eating together with other people always is enjoyable. On the contrary, it can be terrible. I mean, we can all remember terrible dinner parties or lunches or so on with people that we don't want to live with. But still, I am sure that if we stop eating together with others, we will lose something fundamental in the human experience. We should also remember when it's a call for innovations. There is a call for innovations for food in the future. But we should also remember and perhaps try to take into account early on how innovation always have social effects. This is a sample of previous Swedish innovations, which all have had social implications. I will not go into them into detail, but just think about how much frozen food, milk cartons have changed the way that we could interact and not least how much time we have or did not have to spend on cooking. One instance, for instance, I mean, Starbucks coffee, what was the innovation there? There's nothing really special about the coffee, although they may claim it. The concept, well, okay, but it wasn't the first cafeteria in the world. Packaging, well, okay, fancy logo. I wouldn't say that any of it was sort of a disruptive innovation in itself, yet still, Starbucks was a complete game changer of how we thought about food service in the world. So what did they do? What was the innovation? I would say that the interesting thing was that it was a concept designed to encourage new ways of mobility in urban settings. And with Starbucks and the other thing, we started to move around in urban settings in a brand new way. We started to eat and drink on the go, and all of a sudden it was okay to eat and drink in places where we never before would have thought that it would be okay to eat and drink. And that was sort of the social consequences of the innovation, and the innovation in itself would sort of feed out of a social transition that was, of course, emerging way before Starbucks started the concept. There are some really interesting ongoing trends now that we can consider, that we can think about if we think about the future. One is the trend for eating more and more fresh food. Fresh vegetables, not least, which was basically a very, very rare experience if we go to Scandinavia, Sweden, go back in history 100, 150 years ago. You did not eat fresh vegetables, and that was a part of the storage economy. You should keep it so it would be so that you would have a food in these months, in March, February, before the growing season started again. So that's one very, very disruptive change of our eating habits, which can be interesting to take into account into the future. We also have a brand new opening up of the mouth, we can say. There has been a tremendous explosions of new sensations in the mouth in Swedish household. This is actually a picture from a Swedish household where they have an Asian combo kit for dinner. Just an everyday, an typically everyday meal. And this is only one of the examples on how we have developed the eating habits and included so many more tastes, spices, ingredients, and so on. So there is really no need to say that, oh, people are so conservative, they can never change their eating habit. We have changed them enormously during just a few decades. Another disruptive thing is this guy. No, not this guy, but he and other persons like him and me, men doing domestic cooking. In Sweden today, more than a third of all domestic meals is cooked by a male. And in the younger cohorts, it's basically 50-50. The kids going to Swedish kindergarten today belongs to perhaps the first generation in history where it is not self-evident that it is the mother that has the responsibility of the everyday cooking. And that also creates a whole lot of new opportunities and challenges for eating in the future. However, is this the dystopia of the pandemic? Is this the future? Authorities saying to us that yes, you may live with another person, you may sleep in the same bed as another person, but when you go out to shopping mall, you don't have to eat with another person. You should eat one by one. That is to say that commensality, companionship, eating together with others, that is something that we must defend, and we must understand how important it is. It can also be a social event to cook with each other. And this lovely elderly couple making sausages for Christmas is only one example. But there are many, many others, and perhaps actually increasing how people become social, not by eating together, because single meals, single households and so on is constantly increasing, but by cooking together. And that is also an overlooked aspect when you think about people saying, okay, but we used to have every meal together in the family. But what you don't think about was that it was a very strong norm that it should be only one person in the household, namely the adult woman, that you do all the cooking. So now it perhaps is in a transition where cooking becomes more social and eating becomes less social. But still, there is social dimensions involved in cooking together that I think that we can enhance even further. Finally, this lovely picture of the cat points to that when we think about eating in the future, we should actually not forget that we live with animals. And the pets, they take up quite a substantial proportion of everything that we eat. So, conclusion, the food for future thoughts. I think that we must eat ourselves into the future in slightly new ways. But I also think that some of the future lies in learnings from the past. We live in a window of opportunities because the mouth as a gatekeeper, it's much sloppier than it used to be. And I think that those strategies should take into account that we cook for different reasons, that different people cook, and that we eat in different settings than we have done in the previous 100 years or even 1,000 years in history. And do not forget how animals is. I mean, the pet food market is huge. 91.1 billion in US dollars in 2018 and still growing. So let's remember that we may eat alone, but we always are related with other people when we eat. And I hope that that could be some sort of food for thought for the upcoming interesting panel discussions and questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was extremely interesting. And there are other panelists are online. Welcome to this evening's event, everyone.
Hello. Thank you.
Hi.
So my first question actually to you, Håkan, you talked about how we can learn more from history, and you talked a little bit about as well that we have seen the discussions we can see today already in the future. What really caught my attention was the talk about when the population went through a growth spurt, we saw change. Do you think that crises and big events in the world can really push forward the way we eat?
Yeah, they can, and but it's often not the specific events or that perhaps change the way we eat. But some events or some crisis can really sort of boosts things that has been going on for years or decades or so. So they can sort of be a sort of a light the fire, and not least make us reflect about it. I think, I mean, the pandemic, I have never before got so many questions about the social dimensions of eating, because all of a sudden they became so obvious for people, and they become obvious when all of those that we thought that we would take for granted is not there anymore. So yes, I think at least crisis events, they really feed the way that we reflect about things, and that is also a seed for change.
Interesting. I can't help but wonder when we talk a little bit what happened in the past. If we look back the past couple of decades, are there any trends that you think that we'll see now when we're venturing into a new world, really, when we leave the pandemic behind us?
Oh, good. Yeah, good question. Um, but I, but I mean, what we can see and could see already before is a sort of the return of industrial food. So this sort of disruption where large-scale food industry were treated more as, hooligans that ruined food, rather than the heroes of the 1950s and 60s. Uh, that there is a new acceptance, I think, for large-scale food in the youngest generation, which we can see not least in all the meat analogs, and ideas of eating more sustainable, to do things with, for instance, plant proteins to make them more easy to deal with in an everyday basis. And I think that also the issue of food safety. I mean, the pandemic, once again, I mean, buying apples wrapped in plastic, which was for any of the hipster generation, that was an absolute no. You would never be, you wouldn't ever, never ever wanted to be seen with a with a box of plastic packaged apples in your bag. But now all of a sudden, there is a sort of a growing awareness that perhaps not all of the food safety measures that the industry have been doing, that perhaps they are good for us, at least in some way. So I would definitely not want to romanticize industrial food or large-scale food industry as such. But what I think is very positive is that this actually leave rooms for a more fruitful dialogue between the food industry and the consumers, to not put just being in one corner throwing mud at each other, but more of a fruitful dialogue where you can see how there could be some mutual benefits.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I have Arash sitting next to me. I was thinking a little bit in the same line there. Do you see any trends coming back now during the pandemic?
Well, Håkan just pretty much covered everything.
Yeah.
It was very interesting and very lovely to hear that. I'm just going to quickly go through it. I mean, if you ask me, I can divide it off before 70s and 80s and after that. So before 70s and 80s and all the way back to agriculture and industrial revolution, we did consume fruits, fresh fruits and veggies. And that's what we had on our hand because it was obvious what we can get a hold of. And then we consumed them. Whatever we needed, we had it around us and we could consume them. Basically, everything was local. And it comes in 70s and 80s where we got microwave and television, and then luxury lifestyle came to our home, where we wanted to afford that when we tried to have those luxury lifestyles. So everybody in a household, any member of the family, they started working. When everyone started working, so convenience and efficiency become very popular. So anything was convenience, Håkan mentioned it about the coffee, and that's one of the things. It was very convenient, very easy to get a hold of, and then it was on a go. And that's where the fast food industry was born. And the pressure and demand was so high, where we started looking at the food system from the economic perspective, rather than biological, that what we need to eat. And that's where everything started changing slightly until like a decade or 2 decades ago. And that's how it started.
That's extremely interesting, because something I picked up in the keynote speech here as well is that we have changed the way we've eaten the past decades. But my question, having heard multiple ideas during the year I've worked at VentureLab, and what I've learned from our wonderful business developers that I can see are with us tonight, is that the hardest thing to make a consumer do is to change the way they do something if they can just decide not to do it at all. And when you talk about fast food and Starbucks, that's convenience, and people tend to be happy when there are a more convenient way to do something. Could that be an issue when we're looking into the future with these new inventions, if they're not as convenient as the inventions from the past?
I mean, we're never gonna stop running.
No.
I don't think so. And then we're never gonna stop eating.
No.
So what, in my opinion, what's gonna happen is, since in any crisis comes in innovation.
Yeah.
And then so the new innovation would be something adjustable to what we have. We are the social species. We are not gonna stop having people around us. What we're gonna have is, if possibility comes with innovation, is to have more options on the shelf, whether it's a restaurant or whether it's a supermarket or anywhere else. We have more options. We are not going to be eating, we might not be eating what we are having as of today, but the options is going to be more vast, and people have more options to choose from. And that's where the convenience and efficiency is a part of it as well, if you ask me.
Okay. Yeah. Claudia, I would like to invite you. You're working with insect protein, something I know that I've actually seen in a debate article as soon as yesterday, I think, when they talked about the difficulty of making Swedes eating insects. How do you work with the fact of having people change the way that they live to start eating your product?
I think this is still one of the biggest questions that all other entrepreneurs working within the industry are wondering as well. I think that what has been done so far is to transform the food, so transform insects to make them palatable, and transform them and making them into powdered form. And that's why we've seen in the recent years a boom of like all these protein snacks and products that aim to substitute other meat alternatives. But changing, as other people also mentioned, like changing the perception of food and changing the way people approach food is still one of the hardest things to do. And we have to consider that insects also carry with them a huge stigma, especially in the Western world. So I would say that one way to make it palatable has been actually to transform them into powdered form, and to kind of enhance the benefits that eating insects would bring. For example, the sustainability aspect, the higher sustainability and the higher protein content of insects if compared to other alternatives. So these have been some of the elements, so to speak.
Thank you. Malin, you work with Lantmännen and ICA Group, and these are big companies in Sweden. Do you have any insight on this version of more sustainable food and consumption when it comes to insect protein?
When it comes, yeah. But I think, I mean, as Claudia said, it's it is definitely a cultural, step to take towards eating insects, and that's one. And I also think that the issue of, you know, we don't really need it right now. I don't think that people feel, you know, that this is something that you have to move over to. There are so many options today, so it's not really that kind of trigger. But I think also, I mean, one of the issues that we always come back to when we develop new products or anything is, you know, the taste issue, and you have to sort of convey the taste and what convince the consumers that this is something that they will like. And I think that maybe that is one of the major hurdles for insects right now, because we don't know what it tastes like. People don't have that kind of relation to insects. And then because we have a bit of a, you know, a hurdle to overcome, it becomes even more. So I think maybe some kind of I know that there is research being done, for instance, by Ola Albrechtsson to find like the sensory language of insects and what does it do to help consumers understand what it is that they are actually eating in that sense. But again, I think that taste is one of the major. It doesn't matter how sustainable or how good it is in any. If we don't get the taste into it, then we can put as many products as we want in the market, but it won't last. I think that's the sort of one of the key learnings to all the things that we've done and all the research that we've done on consumers. But then I think, I mean, one of the, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just nodding and agreeing.
It's a bit of a lag here, I think. And I was just also thinking about what has changed maybe, and when you talked about the corona effect, I think that one of the things that we have seen also, I mean, I think most remember last year when at this point of time where the shelves in the stores began to get empty on specific things. I mean, the toilet paper was one thing, but we don't eat the toilet paper. But then we had like the flour and yeast and pasta and stuff like that. And I think that maybe one of these things that has also been accelerated by the pandemic is the move, because as Håkan said, we've had a huge trend in fresh the past, you know, decade or so. But now we also see almost like the comeback of the pantry. And I don't know if you follow things like on social media, I mean, where celebrities and others used to show their walk-in closets and, you know, show their shoes and everything. Now they show their fridges and their pantries, and it's organized and it's almost color-coded and stuff like that. So it's sort of, it is the picture that Håkan showed of the woman showing, you know, in front of her pantry. It's almost a revival of that now, because we have seen, you know, the benefits and the advantages from many points of use when it comes to things that are not necessarily, doesn't all have to be fresh. There are values in the other parts of food too.
Yeah, that is extremely interesting. I wrote down actually I think I grew up kind of in a world where fresh food has been it's not only trendy, it's also what you're supposed to eat. So it's fresh chicken, fresh vegetables, fresh meat. You kind of look down upon the canned. So it's very interesting to see that trend is kind of shifting. And it's a discussion I have with my younger sister. She's 10 years younger than me, and how different our generations look at that.
And also the consumer knowledge has gone up as well.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's a supermarket or restaurant, again, I mean, they know more about the health, they know more about the nutrition and nutrition values of the product they consume. They care about their body and then their health, and then that affects a lot on consumer desire and consumer behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Hannes, I want to invite you into the debate as well. You wrote in your presentation about this topic specifically, about how the pandemic, a crisis, actually makes us in need of creativity when it comes to food, both as a social aspect, but as a practical one as well. Do you have any input in this part of the debate?
I'm.
Oh, we can't hear you, Hannes.
Can't you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
You can? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Now I can hear you.
Sorry. I think it's. Thank you for having me, and a very interesting presentation from Håkan. And and lots of thoughts about where we're at now. And a problem with the future is that you can only know what happened after it happened. But you can see trends today, I think, and one of the trends with hygiene and so on, and connected to the pandemic. But I also see other trends. I think a trend that has been enlarged, as Håkan talked about, not creating something entirely new, but sort of putting gasoline on a fire, has been the question of added value, and added value in the sense that if you look at Rekoringa, for example, they have had an increasing customer base during the pandemic, and I think there are many reasons for that. One is that there is a trend towards wanting to know how things are made, and wanting the transparency of knowing the person that grows the vegetables, knowing the person that feeds the animal. And the existing system has found it very hard to be able to convey those kind of added values. I also, if you look at trends, if I look in the future, I think that we are now a lot about what we eat. So you identify with if you're a vegan or vegetarian or flexitarian or whatever, moving more in connection with this, with the added value, is how it's made. I think that will be more important in the future. Even if I'm vegan, it doesn't mean that I'm sustainable or healthy if I don't know how this is made. So I think that's part of the trend. I agree with Malin. Taste is key. I mean, I've tried a lot of insects, and to my view, they're quite boring to eat. A lot of them by themselves, and I think that is a problem. If you want people to continue eating them, you have to make them tasty, because otherwise you won't do it. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think a factor that has weighed in a lot, and that is something that you talked about, Malin, is that when the toilet paper disappeared and the flour disappeared, you started to think about resilience, because these were stupid products to be worried about, because we are net producers of toilet paper, so we don't need to stack them because we can export them. Looking at farming, for example, if you look at Swedish farms before the pandemic, I had the idea that we were self-supplying to 50%. When the pandemic started, I got down to 14%. After a while, I realized that if you look at all the things you need to make the soils that in my background here, fertile or able to produce food enough, we're 0% because we need machinery, and we need nutritions, and we need minerals, all those things. And I think that realization has made also put into the fire of locally produced, of sustainability, of wanting to know, packed sort of added values on everything. And I think this is something that industry that you are talking about, Håkan, are going to have to address when they produce. Because I think if you look at eco, for example, today I think it's more or less, I think local is perhaps more important as a statement, because eco is more or less considered, it's more mainstream now. It's supposed to be eco. It's supposed to be an eco alternative, whereas 10 years ago it was harder to find.
Yeah.
I used to work with wine, and 30 years ago, an ecological wine was ecological instead of being tasty. It was sort of you couldn't choose.
No.
Yeah.
You couldn't have the taste and the ecological wine. And that's where insects are. Sorry, you asked me in. You got a lot.
Can I just add to your Hannes, because we oh, do you hear me? Sorry. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. No, I was just wanted to actually confirm what Hannes is saying, because we do surveys at Lantmännen where I work, and ask consumers, you know, how important different aspects around food is for them. And we definitely saw that during the, I mean, locally produced and Swedish has been a very, you know, important factor. It's actually, it's next to taste. Swedes say that from Sweden is the most important aspect when they buy food in general. It's not just from our categories, but in general. But we also saw that during the pandemic, this interest for Swedish and locally produced food increased. You know, so that we had a real surge with that, and also connected to that was that the consumers had this interest in both supporting the farmers and the farming, you know, the agriculture. It has become more aware among them that this is something that we should support, but also that it has both or you could say like an economic value, but also this from a sustainability point of view value for them. So it's quite interesting to see. And I think that what you said, I mean, the pandemic has accelerated many of the trends that we have seen, like the health issue too, but we have sort of got an extra boost during the pandemic period in many of them.
Yeah, I can myself say that I've been more and more aware of that, especially now when we have kind of a export war in the world when it comes to vaccine supplies, and you realize that maybe we are not as international as we thought we were. But I thought also that I would let Claudia in. We talked about a protein that actually would help us quite a lot in regard to a lot what we talk about. But how do you resonate about the taste being an issue when it comes to insect protein?
I think that one of the main challenges, as we already said, is the perception of insects and its association with it being disgusting and being pests. But if I look back, like as Håkan said, we're not reinventing the wheel, not even with insects. Actually, insects have been part of our nutrition and they've been crucial in our evolution since prehistory. What we are doing now is just to basically having different stages of introduction. When I say that we are making them into protein, it is a way to make them more palatable. It is a way for us to make them closer to our bodies. Like if I want to connect, for example, to what Håkan said, actually, this is something that he taught me back in my days when I was studying my master's. He was mentioning Pasifal, because this Finnish sociology and this conception of the body as a sensory being, and basically I think that turning the insect into power and adding it to other ingredients, making it, I don't know, adding it into protein shakes or making it turning it into something sweet, it is a way for people to be introduced to insects and to no longer perceive them as something exotic, as something outside of our bodies, but to make it something more like habitual, something that can be part of our daily lives. And the challenge, yes, Anna, oh, sorry. Like the challenge is actually this one, because like you cannot be indifferent to food. Either you like it or you don't like it. So the challenge is how do we make the purchase of insects as something recurrent? Because people can, challenge themselves and have this kind of recreational activity when they're challenging themselves and like, okay, let's try crickets, let's try spiders, let's try, other arthropods. But the challenge is really to how can we make it something common?
Thank you so much. I'm gonna steer this discussion a little bit more to the social aspect, actually. So, Håkan, you talked a lot about this being like a pivotal part of our cultural life. Why do you think that is? Why have we chosen food to be such a cornerstone of the way that we interact with each other?
I'm not really sure that we ever chosen it. It was sort of a, or if we choose it, it was sort of a means of survival. Because I mean, the original human way of organizing sociality, the king, that was a food community. I mean, we bonded up with a reasonable amount of other people to ensure that we got food into our stomachs. So and it's sort of just never left us. I mean, we stick together because we collect food, we hunt for food, we gather food, cook food, and so forth. And in that way, we are a sort of an eating community. And also another thing which I think is quite interesting in these periods of raw food. I mean, we should also consider that we are the only species on the planet that actually use fire to prepare our food. And that is not a bad thing. I mean, that has enormous evolutionary benefits from that. I mean, that's the reason for why humans have been able to spread all over the world and can live on many different things. We can walk up, we have a third of the belly of chimpanzees, for instance. We do not have to spend 4 hours chewing every day, and so we can do other things there. But I mean, making a long story short, that eating together and how we do cooking is a sort of what defines us as humans. It's just that it's so self-evident that we never really reflects upon it, but I think we should, and I think that it's also, I mean, why we eat, how we eat, where food comes from, and so on. Were you ever taught anything of that in school? I wasn't. But still, it's sort of the fundamentals of knowledge. Yeah? So I think it should really could be reintroduced, reinstalled, and if we do that, if we start to learn more about food and also learn with food, I think that future generation can be much wiser than what our generation have been about about thinking about how to organize a sustainable food system.
That is very interesting. I wonder then, because you also said that statistic that I've heard before, that we are becoming more and more solemn when we eat. More people live by themselves and eat alone. What are we losing, and how does that affect us, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Of course, it depends on what kind of communities you lose and what you gain. I mean, there are also a lot of, as I said, terrible memories of forced commensality. Either, if it is, that you have to sit up like this in the back with your knife and fork, and not allowed to speak, and so that's perhaps not the best way of creating commensality, or being forced to eat in a dining hall with 300 other people, and so on. So I mean, we shouldn't romanticize eating together too much, and there is also new ways of creating communities that I think is very interesting. But I still think that if we totally stop eating together, we would lose a lot. We would lose the way of create bonding, because there is a special bond between people that sit down and eat together. It has always been and will always be probably the best medium to share stories. I mean, to tell each other about what they think, what has happened during the day, and so on. So we lose so many dimensions of social life that has been facilitated by the common meal. So I think that we should really be aware of that, and so reinstall companionship and commensality, but perhaps it's just a great thing if you can choose your companionship and not be forced into them.
We've talked about sustainability, local, the social aspect, and a lot more. And Arash, I kind of want to ask, what are the innovations that we need to continue developing and seeing like a better tomorrow and thrive as humans? What innovations do we need?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I'll take an example for our own startups. We are an upcycling company. We use the residue products of other food production, and we make food out of it. Right now, how we design it is based on social aspects and individual aspects of it. So what we do is just we try to use our resources as sustainable as possible. As that's one of the things we are looking at it. So the innovation here is just to reuse our resources and then make sure that the innovation along the way from the food tech perspective is going to come along, so it's going to contribute to the better nutrition values and the better healthier food towards consumers. And that's where we are looking at it at this stage.
Yeah. So to the whole panel, what kind of challenges do you see when we talk about food tech and the approaches that we need to take? What are the big challenges ahead of us? I can start with
I can answer that. We face lots of challenges. From my perspective, I speak about my own startup, is obviously having the resources around us to develop the product as great as possible to the level we want it. We are in the best era of starting with the different options. I mean, insects is definitely one of the options. I mean, I know a startup, they're starting insects farm in Malmö.
Yeah.
And then so that's the starting point. And then upcycling companies such as myself is another option. So what we are trying to do is to get our resources and get to work with governmental organization, private organization, investment companies to get to work these mechanical points together, so we can as fast as possible, as quick as possible, to become creative and being innovative, so we can put the good products out. Not any product, just a good product with the higher nutrition values. And the challenge is getting these organizations work together and then get them to help us out to grow with it.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to get a lot of help, but I know there are other startups that are challenging.
Yeah. Well, it is there are huge challenges, as you say. Does anyone else from the panel have any input in this question?
Or yeah, well,
go ahead
first, Malin. Okay. If I want to think from my perspective, from the perspective of Entomovis, I would say that one barrier could be legislation. At least when it comes to insects, there has been huge barriers when it comes to the authorization of different species. Basically, it is still a challenge, even though there is slight shifts towards allowing insects in Europe. So I would say that there is need for synergies and between legislative institutions, like legislative organs, and other organizations. For example, in Europe, we have IPIF that is really collaborating a lot with the European Commission and working towards actually allowing the trade of insects here in Europe. So this would be, for me, at least from my point of view, one of the challenges for innovation, the legislative barrier.
Yeah, and a practical challenge is that. Malin, you also had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think that because I really hope that from a sort of consumer perspective, that consumers will let food sort of regain some of its value, that we will, because I mean, the amount of money that we spend on food today in relation to other things has dropped, so we spend a lot more on other things now, and food is becoming cheaper and cheaper and has been doing that for quite some time. And we spend at Lantmännen, we spend like 250 million on different research, into the food of the future and the crops and the everything behind the whole agricultural chain. But in the end, it has to sort of we have to let it cost somehow. We have to be able, or we have to let food cost. I think it's quite amazing that that consumers sometimes react when the price of milk or whatever, flour, these staples go up with 50 öre or something like that, and feel like that is really a huge problem. And then you buy maybe then Starbucks cafe latte for 47 kronor one. I mean, we don't have, to me, we don't have a really realistic relation to what food costs. And I think that also depends on what Håkan said. We have lost, contact with the production and where the food comes from. So to me, I think one of the challenges is to be able to explain to consumers the value of food. I don't mean it's the consumer's fault to not pay, but we need to be much better at explaining the value so that they feel it's worth paying, maybe a bit extra to get good food and sustainable, healthy, and all these values that I think we need for the future.
I can make a very quick comment on that one. It's interesting what Malin says. We need to be more transparent about where the food is coming from towards the consumer. The consumer have the power of choosing what to buy or not to buy. At the moment, between half to 1/3 of the world food production goes to waste immediately before we even get to our supply chain. And that is the amount that 2-3 countries can be fed for nearly a full year. And that's a huge amount. As long as consumer, they know where the food is coming from, where the background of these story, and so they understand the supply chain, they can choose what to buy and not to buy.
Please go.
No, I would just like to add that I think what you are saying, Malin, and also about, and you, Arash, about transparency and these valuing. And if you look at the phenomenon of rekoringar, you have an example of where people are prepared to pay quite a lot for food and just taking out all the middle men in between. And that is where I see that the industry and supermarkets have a problem, because it's hard for them, as you say, Malin, to explain why this product is as good as the one you buy at Rekoringar. It's something about credibility and transparency. The other thing I wanted to say is connected also to what Håkan talked about with sustainability. I think the challenge is to look at it from many points of view. It has to be social sustainability. There has to be social, economic sustainability. We live in a capitalistic world, so if people don't make money from what they do, it stops. We have farming in Sweden that is more sustainable probably than a lot of other countries, but they're not able. Their prices are marked against the global market, where those sustainable values are not valued at all. So we have challenges when it comes to paying for sustainability or making sustainability profitable. And I think that's a challenge for the entire value chain, from earth all the way down to earth again, to make it sustainable from a holistic point of view. And that's why I also talk about just being vegan or vegetarian or eating animals that's not the choice for me. It's the choice of how it's made. That's the choice. And I think that's the challenge as well. We need to make things in a better way.
I also hear kind of a juxtaposition here when it comes to trends, because as you correctly point out, several of you talk about locally produced products, but you're also talking about that the industrialized products are coming, doing a comeback, things that we can have in our pantry. Can they just live along next to each other, or will they? Is there a discussion or an issue that can come up with those very separate views?
We need both. You need both.
Great.
Yeah.
Because fermentation has been along with human history along the way from the beginning. So we if you don't do fermentation, we're not gonna bear.
No.
So that's one of the joy of life. I mean, but again, it has to go along the way.
Okay.
And I also think that, I mean, stop thinking about small scale or big scale as such. Think instead of smart scale. I mean, what is the smartest scale for a specific product, a specific type of occasion? Then we will see that you don't at least always have to juxtapose small scale and large scale, because we do need them both. So think instead of, I mean, what is the smartest scale of this type of food that I, together with my friends, can eat today?
Interesting. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a very, very interesting panel discussion. I think that the next thing that we should do now is invite the audience and let them question you for a little bit. Some actually have sent, this is such a popular event that we actually got some questions beforehand. So I think that we should just jump into them first. So the first question from the audience today is, how will the future of vegetarian/plant-based food look like? Will it be mainly unprocessed food, or how much will there be of processed and highly processed vegetarian/plant-based food?
Well, forgive me, I'm just jumping. If you ask me, a decade from now on, we are not going to be consuming what we are consuming as of today. There are many startups coming up. There are many companies putting in effort. There are many food companies that are putting effort to create more innovation concerning food. So the options on the shelf in the restaurants or in supermarkets are more. So within 10 years, between 40 to 60% of the cattle farming and animals farming is going to disappear. They're going to go bankrupt because the consumers, they've got more option to choose from, with the higher nutrition values, with the tasty food, and also it's cheaper than what they consume now. So the option is going to be more, but again, as mentioned before, but being vegetarian or vegan it's a choice. How to choose that.
Yeah.
But we have more option to choose from
Okay.
in regards to what we are consuming now, if you ask me.
Yeah. Anyone else who wants to jump into this question? Malin?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I mean, when we sort of talk to consumers, I would say that most of them, it's not that they go, completely vegan or vegetarian. Most of them switch and eat some of the meals, or even some part of the meals, more green and less meat and so on. So I think that it's we've seen so far it's been quite a few options that has been put on the market that has been to replace the meat in the same format. You have the sausages and the beef and stuff like that. But we also see a lot of consumer demand for vegetarian or greener products that are sort of in their own right. So it's not something that mimics something else that it's already meat-based, but it's something that is, a meal in its own right, based on vegetables or greens and stuff like that. But I think I agree with Arash. I think that a lot of the we see a huge research and development within different proteins, and a lot of it, away from the soy that has been dominant so far, and now we have pea-based, and you have mushrooms, and you have many different basis that I think we'll see in 10 years from now. We will have a huge palette of options to choose from, and I think that consumers will, although I don't think maybe it's this complete opposites between meat and plant-based. I think they will coexist, but hopefully we will have the meat is better meat and ethical meat and stuff like that, and sustainable meat, and then you have the whole adding the whole, or you have the complements between the greens and the meat.
I perceived part of the question being, will it be industrialized, or will we cook by ourselves? And to that part, I would say that I think that the thing that is a part of moving this vegan trend is convenience. And for a large part, industry is part of convenience. So I would say that I think that trend will, as long as we have the convenience trend, it will be an easier way to get into being vegan if you're not used to cooking, for example. So you can choose without having to have a interest in it. I can see it in my daughter. This is the second time she's a vegetarian, and the first, when she was 14, it was just, she was more like a cheese sandwich vegetarian, or it was just everything was pre-made. Now she's learning how to cook, so she's making wonderful dishes. But so I think it's part of a. We'll have both. We'll have both, but I think industry will really push it to make it convenient for people to make a choice.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that because we have a couple of questions actually that is concerning health connected to our discussion today. So the first one is I've always felt that vegetarian food has up to now been synonymous with healthy food. What will the health impact and reputation of vegetarian food be with an increased amount of vegetarian food being highly processed and or junk food today? It seems like people today say that vegetarians live for longer than an average person. Will this not be the case in the future?
I can say it. Again, what we are having now is gonna evolve again, and it's gonna change again, and then the quality of the products we are having now is gonna get better and better and better. That's a part that innovation comes from, because when we as a company we are looking at the product we are having, we don't want to put out the product full of sugar and then process the food to put it out. We're trying to make the product as healthy as possible because it's a competition for us. We want to stand out. We want to show everybody that this is not the bad product you're consuming, because also the values of the company we put in the first place we want to go follow those values, and then make sure the proposition we put in the first place towards the healthier and more nutritious drinks or food that we are producing. This is from one single startup point of view.
Yeah. So would you say that you see the trend being that we are more conscious about the food we eat, that health is an important part of
Yeah, definitely. If you ask me, it's gonna change in a sense. I mean, my son, when he grows up, he's 3 now, but when he grows up, he's definitely gonna look at what we have been consuming now, and then he's not going to touch that, and he said, this is not healthy for me, and this is not good for me, I'm not going to do it. And it's not just a healthy part of it, it's also ethical aspects of it. If he knows that the fish is coming from the unknown sources, or the meat is coming from unknown sources, or even vegetables and greens are coming from unknown sources, he might not be able to touch it, and then that goes with everybody else.
Okay, interesting. So I'm giving the question to you as well. This is connected to I think that what the person holding the question wonders about is that obesity is a very big issue around the world overall, and we see it increasing. Do you still see that health will be a big trend overall in what we're consuming and what we're eating? Yeah.
I think technology is going to help us, because health is a very individual thing, I would say. For my son, 27 years old, eat what I'm eating might not be so healthy for him. For me to eat what he's eating is not healthy for me. I'm a diabetic. I can't eat carbs to the extent that I would like to. And I think that in the future it will be possible to do analysis of what is good for me. When I grew up, what's it called? Vad heter Socialstyrelsen? Do you know? Recommended.
Yeah.
Health and they recommended us to eat 6 to 7 sandwiches every day.
Yes.
I would die if I ate 6 to 7 sandwiches every day. So things change, and I think one of the fundamental thing will be that what is good for me, depending on where I'm from and my DNA and so on, might not be the best for you. So I think it will be more about, as I said before, how it's made, and I will be able to design my own food to a bigger extent, depending on my special needs. And then you can add all ethical and resilience and everything about that. But I'm hoping for a future where I wouldn't become a diabetic, because I knew already when I was 20 that this is good for me and this is not good for me.
Well, it sounds like you would find our next Trendspotting event, preventative health, that's in later this spring, interesting. And I hope that all of you in the panel just raise your hand and start talking if you want to say something. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. Is anyone else interested to have a part of this question?
Yeah, I can just add that. I mean, when we talk to consumers, I mean, health is a big issue, and I think it's always been, but it's also shifting. What we consider healthy and how we view it, and also I think what's the thing now is that it's not enough just to go with one trend. If you say that health is one trend and sustainable is another, and indulgence is a third, and convenience is a fourth, and so on. It's not one or the other now. It's, the consumers expect the products to have a little bit of everything. You don't want to choose, and they expect us to help them provide that. So that's one of these, you see this whole explosion among snacking products, which is geared towards more healthier versions with less fat or less sugar, and having some kind of healthy aspect, but you don't want to compromise with taste, and you don't want to compromise with the convenience issue. So I think that is what makes it maybe a bit complex now, or it should make it easier, but it makes it more complex to sort of get that all together. And I think, again, what Hannes said is, I also believe a lot that we will go, if we look 10 years ahead or something, it will become much more personalized and much more, tailored. We are already going along that path, that people are getting more knowledgeable about what their own bodies require and what's good for them. But I also think that the technology and the possibilities that we will get, that will be more available to more people, will help us in tailoring food to a much larger extent that we have today.
So convenience, a big key, but it also sounds like innovations is going to be more and more complex if we want to tailor to everyone. Interesting. I actually have a question specifically to Claudia. So they're asking, how do you feed the insects? Do you feed them something that specifically humans can't eat, or how does that work?
There is insect feed, but there has been a huge discussion regarding considering insect rearing as part of a circular economy business model. So insects can be actually fed food waste like vegetables, and there has also been companies that have been trying to feed insects with different kind of vegetables in order to understand how this would affect their taste. Then, of course, one also has to be careful with what we feed insects with, because I haven't touched upon that. But of course, there is risks when it comes to insect rearing. Of course, the substrate, what insect is really important, because there is still a risk for microbiological hazards or chemicals. When it comes to what they are fed, so there has to be careful choice in what they are fed still.
Interesting. But it sounds like if we could actually just reuse food that we don't eat anyways, that's a win-win for everyone. Well, except the insects, they do get eaten. Yeah.
Using our resources as sustainable as possible.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I have another question that is very connected to what you've been talking a lot about, Hannes. So I think maybe I'll direct it to you, and then other ones can jump in. How common will locally produced food be in the future? Is this something that's going to only increase in the countryside or smaller villages, or do you see it be locally, or do you see locally produced food be more common even in the bigger cities?
I think there are, as with everything we've been talking about, there are similar trends. So it's local and I would say that looking at the pandemic, it has sort of increased the interest in locally produced. And we also have the trends where you produce food in the cities, honey, growing on rooftops, building with where you integrate food production in buildings. And I think you probably know, Håkan, if this is completely new or people have been thinking like that before. I do think when it comes to farming, at least in Sweden, and it comes to the farmers, we will see multiple business models for them. We have a system where basically it's been for the past 50 or 60 or 70 years, where you produce and you have the option to sell to one or two buyers. So you produce for industry. So as a farmer, you're the furthest away from the consumer, which is the recording and everything is turning into something different. So I think that we might see a trend where farmers produce also for a local market. You supply the industry, but you also you take part of your land and you might grow a different kind of wheat or something that is higher value, and this you might sell in a different place. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think we'll see a little bit of everything in the future as we have now and in the past.
Yeah, no, that is, thank you so much. We're actually slowly but surely running out of time, guys. It's been a super interesting conversation. I'm super glad to have you here. I thought that I would end our discussion today basically giving you an opportunity to say something short, your last input in the debate, basically. So Håkan, would you like to start? Do you have something to say to our audience before we end the discussion for tonight?
Wow, thank you. Okay, imagine a future where you go back to the roots of the village, a sort of a connected community with a circular economy where you did different parts, where you know that there was an integration between what you did today, what you will do next year and the next year round, where you had the respect for that you could not take out more resources than is needed for the supply of the upcoming generation. I think the village metaphor is something that we could reinvent and reuse, not least in the context of farmers, once again, getting together in semi-small scale, where also the big farmers, say 10, 20 or something together, could create a sort of a modern village that is a part of a new circular and sustainable economy. That's at least my vision for the future, a village vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia?
My vision for the future of food would be kind of along the line with what Håkan said. I hope that as innovation levels increase, consumers will also have more options to choose, and I hope that they will choose also more responsibly when it comes to their dietary habits.
Thank you. Hannes?
I share the previous speaker's views. I would only like to add into this thing I talked about before, how we will eat in the future and if local will be, and adding to the village idea, we could look at a shift in transportation and logistics, so that added value, such as having a village, will be much easier accessible, even if you live in a city. So you will be able to be part of the community or the village without having to physically live in it. And I think that is a great opportunity for the future.
And Malin?
I almost started crying when I heard Håkan and his vision. It was so beautiful. So it was almost like, oh, yes, perfect. But but I think that it is. My vision is. I really hope that we are able to convey the values with food for consumers, and I really hope that consumers start valuing food also. I mean that this is like a cycle that we need to do our part, and consumers need to meet us there. So that's sort of based on the village vision, which is beautiful. I really hope that we can meet in that with the consumers.
Well put. Arash, I will give you the honor to finish up.
It's nice to be the last one.
Yeah.
Everybody else said all the good ones. Well, I would say that be open to what new products are coming to the market. Insect-based food, upcycled food, grown lab food. These are. It's not gonna go anywhere. You might as well just try it out to see if you like them. And then another thing that I personally concern about is think about when you're shopping, doesn't matter where, just think about where the food is coming from. Think twice before you purchase the food. It's not because it looks pretty and everything. There's always, if there's a pretty food stands in the supermarket, there's a story behind it, and something must have gone wrong before they came to the supermarket. Just think twice before you purchase anything.
I think you pretty much nailed that. Thank you so much, Arash. I have the great pleasure to thank our wonderful panel. It's been an amazing evening. It's been a pleasure to listen to your insights and hear your discussions. I also want to thank the people that really helped us to build this event together. And I'm not only mean my amazing co-workers, Amanda and Ellen and Tia, that's behind stage and answering all your questions and helping us with the technical stuff, but it's also with Xplot that helped us to build this together, Theater Supernova, which we are in right now, and also Pengu Studios that are helping us with all the technical stuff. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. We are wrapping up this event, as you might be able to tell, and I want to say thank you to the audience as well. But before we let you go, I want to give you a few tips. In April 23rd to 25th, VentureLab hosts our event, Believe in Your Ideas. It's an idea sprint and a support network event for women and non-binaries. It's one of the most fun events we have each year and each semester. So I highly recommend you checking it out on our website or on our social media. We also have a podcast that's actually going to talk more about food tech. So if you thought this was interesting, wait for that to drop. It's actually our student workers, Tia and Ellen, that brings that together. So I'm very excited to hear more about it, and I hope you are as well. But now, when we wrap this up, you still have the possibility to go network on Hopin. So if you look at our event platform, there is actually a network button as well. And you can meet other students, but also people from the food tech industry, and meet them one-on-one for short sessions. And then if you feel like it's worth it, or if you want to get more out of this, you can connect with them. So connect with them on Hopin, and then maybe on LinkedIn afterwards. Who knows? So I hope that you use this. We have been extremely fortunate to have you all with us. My name was Ylva. VentureLab and LU Innovation, thank you for your participation tonight, and have a great evening.